now that we've addressed the overactive muscles, we want to focus on the underactive muscles. And we're going to do that in this portion of the template under activation, where we're going to specifically talk about core and balance. So throughout the OPT model, there are different exercises that you're going to do for different phases. So when we're talking about core specifically, in phase 1, these exercises that we're going to choose are going to have little to no joint motion of the spine. So we're working literally on intervertebral stability, which all that means are the little muscles that go from vertebrae to vertebrae, to get those firing accordingly to help protect the spine itself. So an example of that would be a plank. So I'm going to go ahead, Brian, can I use you? I'm going to have Brian demo a plank for you guys to see. This exercise is used very often in the gym, but you want to think about the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints at all time. So I'm going to have Brian go ahead and come down onto his forearms. It's very important on a setup standpoint that you relax the hands and that they are spread shoulder width apart and that you're not putting them together, because again, if you do that, what happens is you internally rotate your shoulders, which is a common compensation we want to avoid. So from here, you're going to see we've got good alignment. Elbow and shoulder are directly underneath each other. You want to think about the head, so you don't want to look up and you don't want the head to drop down. So you really want to focus on proper alignment throughout the entire spine. And from here, you can see Brian's already propped up. You're going to think about the feet being shoulder to hip width apart. So literally taking the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints we talked about earlier and now just putting them face down. So quads are going to be in tight. You're going to make sure the heels do not touch. If they touch, that is a compensation because they're trying to use other muscles other than the glutes. So once again, always looking at your client as a whole. Brian's going to draw in through the tummy and squeeze the glutes. You're going to make sure that your client has a flat back. Oftentimes you may see the shoulder blades pop up, and that's kind of known as winging. So in order to cue him out of that, you can put your hand here and tell them to push up. He's going to hold this anywhere from 3 to 5 seconds. He'll drop down on his knees, and then he would repeat. You can do a lot of different exercises, but again, we're really focusing on little to no joint motion of the spine and doing this for reps versus time to start. Go ahead and relax. There are a lot of progressions and regressions you can do as well. This obviously is a great place to start. However, if compensations exist, you can have the client begin on their knees and then progress accordingly. Once you've done your core exercises in phase 1, when we get to phase 2, 3, and 4, so now we're talking a lot about strength, we're going to start adding movement of the spine. And so now we're working on the sexy muscles that you see and everybody wants to begin with. But we know that we've trained him accordingly by getting those little muscles to fire first. So when we start adding more of the motion, the spine is ready for that type of demand. So an example would be a ball back extension. And so I'm going to go ahead and grab this ball. Now, anytime you're in a prone or face down position, it's very good and safe for the client to have their feet anchored against a wall. However, we don't have a wall, so I'm going to be the wall. Again, think about the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, and the reason you want the feet to be anchored is because you can go into triple extension, so Brian can push into my legs. Again, think about the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. He's going to draw in, squeeze the glutes. He can put the hands, which he just did. He crossed his hands over his chest or behind the head as long as he doesn't push on his neck. And then he's going to flex the spine forward and then come up nice and slow. So if you think on a tempo standpoint, it'd be something along the lines of a 2-0-2. Going down for 2 seconds and then coming up for 2 seconds. And we would do that for reps. So again, now we're moving the spine in all of the strength phases when we're talking specifically about core. Lastly, when we get to power, now we're going to move the spine through full available range of motion, but add a power component. So I'm going to have Brian grab the medicine ball, and I'm going to actually have Ken come up here. If you don't have a wall, you are the wall. So it's going to be very important that you as a trainer are ready to handle this demand as well, because what you're trying to do is get the ball back to your client if you're going to do an example such as this. So Brian, go ahead and stand up. I'm going to have you demo a medicine ball rotation pass. And as you can see, Brian's going through full available range of motion. He's rotating in the transverse plane, so it's an excellent core exercise. And he's powering through it with very good form and technique, always maintaining the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. So this is an excellent core exercise when you get to the power phase. Thank you very much, and thank you very much. Brian, go ahead and stand up here. Next, let's talk about balance. So when we get to the OPT model in balance, now what we're trying to do, we've got this newfound length in the self-myofascial techniques as well as the proper stretching. Then we added core, so we activated the other side of the muscle, so we've got good joint alignment. Balance is also super important because your brain needs to figure out what to do with that. And balance training is super important and very, very beneficial for all ages and all populations. So in phase 1, we're thinking again about little to no joint motion of the stance leg. So here I'm going to have Brian come and demo. Go ahead and face the camera so everyone can see. Now you can do this with or without shoes. I'm going to have Brian go ahead and keep his shoes on. However, if he takes his shoes off, then we're taking out any kind of support that we are providing with the tennis shoe, and it makes it a lot harder. So what you can do is put your hands on your hip. I'm going to have Brian go ahead and accept weight onto his right foot. And when you do that, you want to make sure that your client actually brings the toe up, so he's practicing triple flexion. So triple flexion and triple extension are actually motions that you do when you walk. So you get what you train for. We might as well throw that toe up, so therefore we're getting more out of this exercise. From here, all you can see, Brian's going to contract his quad, squeeze his glutes. Now you can do this to start to make sure the client has good balance. If you want to make it more advanced, we're going to go into a single leg balance with reach. So he's going to reach forward in the sagittal plane, come back, flex his toe up. He's going to go out to the side, and as you can see, Brian's got pretty good balance, and then he's going to bring it back in, and then he could also go into the transverse plane. Now again, you can see that might be too advanced, so Brian would stay mainly in the sagittal or frontal plane until I know that he could execute it safely and correctly. Very important to maintain proper alignment at all times, and don't ever sacrifice your form for a number. So phase 1, there's no bend or movement whatsoever on the stance leg. Once we've done this with Brian, we can actually progress him. If his assessment showed me that I could, we would go into now motion of the stance leg. So in phases 2, 3, and 4, we're going to go into flexion and extension of the knee. And so I'm going to have Brian go ahead and demo a single leg squat. So from the side angle, again, think about those parallel lines. We want to make sure at all times your client has good positioning. And what we're focusing on is to make sure that the kneecap stays over the second and third toe. Every time Brian comes up, he's going to squeeze through the right butt cheek, and then he would slowly repeat. So on a tempo standpoint, coming down for about 2 seconds, and then coming up and squeezing at the top. All right, so we would do that on both legs. So great job. And then when we get to phase 5, okay, and when you think of balance, there are a lot of different ways to think about balance, but what we're focusing on is things that you do on one leg. And so you notice in the single leg stance or the single leg balance with reach, he was on 1 foot. On the single leg squat, 1 foot. Now we're hopping, again, staying on 1 foot. And so when your client progresses to phase 5, there are multiple ways of doing hopping patterns. I'm going to have Brian go ahead and accept weight onto the right leg, and he's going to hop forward onto the right leg and hold that landing 3 to 5 seconds. Anyone can hop forward, but what I want to make sure is when he hops that he owns it. So he sticks the landing, he holds that 3 to 5 seconds, and then he'll repeat. So you can have him continue to hop forward on the same leg, or we could say, Brian, with your left leg, hop back. More challenging, but there's a lot of different ways. He can also now hop onto the right, to the side in the frontal plane, and then to the left. Each time holding 3 to 5 seconds. And then of course we could do transverse as well. So these are just ways of thinking about balance progressions, but it's very important to make sure at all times the knee stays properly lined up between the second and third toe, that there's no compensations throughout the entire kinetic chain while you're implementing these exercises. Thank you, Brian. So now let's put it all together. So once again, under activation, we're thinking about targeting underactive muscles. We found out what those muscles were per the assessment. Now we want to match the activation exercises with the correct phase. So if you're in phase 1, you know that there were compensations we're working towards. So therefore, we're going to stay in phase 1 to try to help correct that movement pattern so we get optimal alignment throughout the joint. Remember, in core, little to no joint motion of the spine. We did a plank as an example. Cobras are great. Ball bridges, floor bridges. There are multiple exercises you can choose. However, you really want to maintain proper alignment. Then when we go to balance, little to no joint motion of the stance leg. So the single leg balance with reach. If you want to add body parts, to save time, single leg balance and add bicep curls or overhead presses. Be creative, but be very smart in your programming. Then when we get to phase 2 through 4, so when we're going through and we're really focusing on the strength phases, we're now adding flexion and extension or rotational patterns because we know that our body is ready for that. So examples would be the ball back extension. You could do any kind of crunches on the floor, on the ball. You can do chop and lift patterns. And then again, when we get to balance, we're focusing on moving that leg. So a step up to balance, the single leg squat. Phase 5, explosive movements. You know, you want to actually add explosive movements, but make sure that each time they do it, that their form is perfect. So we just showed you an example of a med ball rotation pass, but you could do a crunch with a throw. Just make sure you as the trainer are prepared to get that ball back to them, and so you're ready to throw it back, or make sure if you're using a wall that it is a cement wall and not one with drywall, okay? And then when we get to balance, we're going to think about the hopping motions. So change the direction, change the plane of motion. Just make sure if they hop that they don't sacrifice something going wrong when they land. So look at the foot and foot positioning, make sure they maintain proper alignment throughout the arch and that their upper body and everything stays ideal in the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. So now let's look at a sample activation template filled out for you. So core, remember little to no joint motion of the spine. One of my favorite exercises is the ball bridge, but you can do this on the floor. This is excellent to get proper glute activation as well as opening up the hips. You would see here we're going to do 2 sets of 15 repetitions at a very slow tempo. And once we are talking about tempo, remember we're thinking about slowing down the eccentric portion of that. So for an example, they would come up for 1, hold for 2, and slowly lower towards the ground for 4 seconds. They would do that 15 times. We would do little to no rest. It depends on your client. But if you're going to go ahead and add another core exercise, the ball cobra is also excellent, especially if your client was showing a forward head, rounded shoulders, or an excessive forward lean. So you want to think we're really trying to get that client to open up the chest and maintain proper alignment throughout the hips. When you get to balance, because this is phase 1, once again, think about little to no motion of that knee. So we're trying to make sure the abs are in, you've got proper alignment, you're making sure that if there's a grape underneath the arch that you don't squish the grape, so we don't want to flatten that foot. We want to maintain the integrity of the arch. And you're going to do anything that you want as long as you don't sacrifice your kinetic chain checkpoints and that you can maintain proper balance on that particular leg. You're going to do 2 sets, approximately 16 or 8 per side, very slow tempo, and then you can rest if needed. Again, your client is going to be the one that will tell you and talk to you about the rest period and what they need. So this is an excellent example of some activation exercises that you can do. Phase 1 is really difficult for someone to maintain proper alignment, especially if you have shown weakness on their compensation because you're really trying to activate muscles that were allowing those compensations.
As we get into the workout, the first OPT component we want to address is the warm-up. So this first section of this workout template, we have warm-up, and under that you're going to have self-myofascial techniques, and depending on what phase of training your client is going to be training in for that session, you're going to have a selection of static, active, and dynamic stretching. Stretching being optimal for any one of the 5 phases. Cardio is also listed as a component, but listed as optional. So as you assess, you've figured out what muscles are overactive and what's underactive. So with self-myofascial technique, we want to use some kind of tool to offer relief or decrease tension through the area. So first we're going to have Ashley demonstrate self-myofascial technique for you using this roller. And the area that we are going to cover is the calf. So you'll see here, the first order of business is to find the tender spot. So I'm going to have Ashley, she's going to go ahead and pick up her hips. She's going to push down to pick up her hips, and she's going to roll from her Achilles right up to the crease of the knee. So I'm just going to have her move. She's going to move her hands and move her hips forward. Now stop right there. You can go ahead and move your hands forward, and that way we keep the hands close to the shoulders, and that way we don't put too much stress on the shoulder joint. And what I'm telling Ashley to do here is to find a tender spot. And what I mean by tender, on a pain scale or a tenderness scale of 1 to 10, I want her to find something that's about a 6 or a 7. How's that feeling so far?
Right there.
Right there. Okay. So just so we don't tire her out, I'm just going to have her go ahead and have a seat. Right there, relax your arms and shoulders. Now take your right leg and go ahead and place it on top of the left. And what that's going to do, it's going to replace the tension that we're missing through her lifting her hips, but augmenting that by putting the opposite leg on top. And if you can give me a number on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you right now?
4.
Okay, so she's at about a 4. So what I want her to gauge for herself is a significant decrease in tension. The other way we can look at it is holding the spot for about 30 seconds, and the release or the decrease in tension should happen within that amount of time. Sometimes it's going to be faster, sometimes it might take a little bit longer. And how are we doing right now?
Like 3. My calves are really tight.
Okay, so she's got a little bit of tension in those calves. So she went from a 4 to a 3. If I kept her here a little bit longer, in no time at all, she should be down to a 2 or a 1. Now, it's not the expectation that she goes down to a 0, but what we are looking for, again, is a significant, noticeable decrease in tension. So once we've hit that 2 or a 1, something to where she's more comfortable being in that one spot, I can have her find an alternative spot within that region, or I can have her just go ahead and go on to the next area, whatever my assessment shows as appropriate. She's going to do that for whatever region we deem necessary and whatever time allows within this session. So once we've addressed self-myofascial technique, now it's time to move on to flexibility, or in this case, static stretching, as an example of what we can do in a phase 1 stabilization training. I'm just going to go ahead and take that from you. And what I'm going to have Ashley do as an example of a static stretch, and I'll just go ahead and keep her here on the mat. I'll put a little padding there so she doesn't put too much stress on her kneecap. It can also be pretty painful on the knee if they're on a hard surface for any significant amount of time. So in this kneeling hip flexor position, I'm having Ashley kneel, knee, hip, shoulder, and ear all in line. Okay, those are the alignments of the kinetic chain checkpoints viewed from the side. So again, with the static stretch, I'm going to get her into position, and I want her to hold the position for about 30 seconds. As this kneeling hip flexor stretch is going to be committed, I want the heel right behind the hip. You'll see here her toe is pointing straight into the ground, avoiding any kind of excessive internal or external rotation of the hip. As we talked about before with the low back arch and finding your pelvic neutral, I'm going to have her do an anterior tilt a posterior tilt as she tucks under, and then having her find her pelvic neutral. So she's going to split the difference between the two tilts, forward and backward, and that's what we're going to use as her pelvic neutral. As the client has demonstrated control or progressed through phase 1 training, it's time to get the client to do more of an active stretch relative to a phase 2, 3, or 4 or strength level phase of training. We're going to use that same kneeling hip flexor stretch and turn that what we did as a static stretch and make this more active. So I want the same 90-90 position through that right leg. So she's going to stretch out the left hip flexor and quad. So 90 degrees at the hip, 90 degrees at the knee. Again, I want good alignment through this knee that's on the ground. So foot and ankle, knee and hip in line. Starting off, ears, shoulders, hips, knees, and ankles as we align that kinetic chain checkpoint from the side. To make this an active stretch, she's going to commit to the same positions that we look for in the static stretch. She's going to do a posterior pelvic tilt, squeeze the glutes, pull the belly button in. She's going to reach up, and she's going to lunge forward, again to the point of tension. Again, we don't have a whole lot of extension that's going to come from the hip, so it doesn't have to be a big motion. She can go do a side flex, and she can open up, hold there 1 to 2 seconds. As she's done with that, then she can unwind and then back off and then re-engage the stretch. Come in, up and over, squeeze and squeeze. Hold that for 2 seconds and unwind. We'll get one more repetition. Good. She's lunging forward. Squeeze and squeeze. Beautiful. Good. Hold here. 1,000, 2, 1,000, and unwind. Good job, Ashley. And that's an active hip flexor stretch from a kneeling position. As we progress from static to active, we're going to get into dynamic. So we're going to get off of this kneeling position, and I'm going to have Ashley move into more of a dynamic stretch. And what we will do here, again, accentuating still the hip flexors, she's going to do an alternating forward lunge with rotation. So I'm going to have you move over here onto the hard surface. So Ashley, what I want you to do is I want you to lunge into a position, a distance and a depth that you're comfortable with. Okay? Now as this is going to go, we're going to add a little rotation. So you're going to have your arms extended out in front, fingertip on fingertip, and whatever leg is in front of you, that's the side that I want you to rotate towards. Okay? All right, so I want you to go ahead and lunge forward, reach out, and rotate with your left knee forward, boom, come back towards me, and stand back up, and lunge with the other leg. As you can see here, she's 90-90, she's up nice and tall, ears, shoulders, and hips in line, nice controlled motion. Now there's a lot of variations, go ahead and keep going, I'll have you do a few more. She can go with the same leg, repeated. I'm watching out for any compensation she might have exhibited during the overhead squat, single leg squat through a low back arch, forward lean, head jutting forward, shoulders shrugging. Good, one more lunge. Again, 90-90, hip, knee, and toe in line. Great job. And stand up. Awesome. Good job, Ashley. And that's an example, a great example of a dynamic flexibility for the hips as we go through that alternating lunge with the rotation. Thank you so much. Have a seat. We've talked about dynamic warm-ups. Now it's time to look at program warm-ups as a whole. So you've assessed your client, you have your information, you know what areas need to improve on their flexibility and range of motion. So with that, we need to know what areas are overactive, and that's what we're going to address with self-myofascial technique, static stretching, active stretching, or dynamic stretching, depending on what we want to cover. So we want to match the OPT phase to the type of flexibility that we're going to incorporate. So with phase 1 or stabilization endurance, we have self-myofascial technique, and to complement that, we have the static stretching. So that's the stretch that we're going to hold for about 30 seconds. We want to improve length, decrease activity in that overactive area. As an optional component, we can incorporate dynamic flexibility as well in this phase. Phases 2 through 4 in the strength levels of training, we still have self-myofascial technique, but now we're going to take that static position and now make it more active. So again, we could use the same stretch, example being a kneeling hip flexor stretch. Instead of holding it for 30 seconds, we can now move into and out of the positions holding between 1 to 2 seconds, and then repeating for 5 to 10 repetitions. And on top of that, we can incorporate another form of dynamic flexibility. And ultimately, in phase 5 or power, we have self-myofascial technique in addition to dynamic flexibility. So that's how, depending on the phase of training, you can complement the self-myofascial technique as it's deemed necessary through compensations observed and the appropriate level of flexibility. Once we've addressed the overactive muscles, now we can incorporate cardio. So with the cardio warm-up, again listed as optional, we want to precede that with any kind of needs for improvement in range of motion, because if we're going to do 5 or 10 minutes on the treadmill, you have to remember that that's 5 or 10 minutes of repetitions of step after step. We want those steps to be as efficient as possible, decreasing risk of injury. Here we have an example of a warm-up for a phase 1 stabilization endurance workout. So we've assessed the client, we know what they need, we know what muscles are overactive, we know what compensations we need to address. So the first component is self-myofascial technique, and in this example we have the foam roller used as our modality. So we have a calf, adductor, and lat as our area of concern, and what we're going to do is we're going to have the client find the spot, hold that spot for about 30 seconds or to where there's a significant decrease in tension in that area. After we've used self-myofascial technique, now it's time to move into the static stretch. And again, we want to make sure that this selection of stretches complements, whenever possible, the areas that we've just foam rolled. Getting them into position, we now have them hold that position for 30 seconds. Again, the purpose here is to improve joint mechanics through addressing overactive muscles. Once we've improved flexibility, range of motion, now we can do some cardio. So a brisk walk, slow jog, something that's light to moderate. All we're really trying to do is to get the client warmed up for the workout that's about to follow. And it doesn't take that long. Anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes of their cardio can be enough to get somebody worked up for their workout.